So the government has regulations on things that we can become dependent upon, things that can cause us to harm other people, harm ourselves, things of that nature, right? So when you hear this, you probably think drugs and alcohol. That makes sense. But can you think of something that we allow even our children to have access to on a daily basis that can have the same effect? I'm talking about technology. I know this sounds crazy, but technology can have similar effects in that we can become dependent upon it and come to rely on it also. So there have been plenty of studies on physical impacts of technology. And first of all, let me explain. When I'm talking about technology, I use that in a general manner, referring to things like cell phones, tablets, computers, things of that sort. The types of things that we use regularly to communicate with other people, access information, that sort of stuff. So there have been plenty of studies, like I said, on the physical impacts that technology can have on our health, like texting causing carpal tunnel, or using cell phones cause brain cancer, that sort of stuff. What I'm talking about today is more the psychological effects that technology has than it is physical. So let's compare technology to drugs. I know it may sound crazy, but let's give it a shot. This should be interesting. So like I said, we can become physically dependent on drugs. We can become psychologically dependent on technology. We come to use technology to do things for us, like our research or our problem solving. Instead of taking the time to go and figure out where to find something in a library, like we used to have to do, or sitting down and doing our math problems by hand using our heads, like we used to have to do, now we rely on things like Google and calculators. Sorry, that went forward a little too fast. So the problem with this is when we come to rely on the technology to do our problem solving and our research for us, we lose the ability to do it ourselves. Our younger generations are learning how to do this as they're growing up. They're learning how to do it via the technology. So they're not even learning the necessary skills for the problem solving and the researching, going to the library, doing the math problems on paper. So that leads me to kind of my next point. When we become so dependent upon the technology, we get to a point where when we don't have it, we have withdrawals from it. Has anybody ever forgotten their cell phone when they left the house? To go to the store, to go to work in the mornings, forget your cell phone, what do? You freak out. Oh my gosh, how am I going to keep up what time it is today? What if somebody calls me? What if I get an email and I don't have it and I'm not able to check it? So the next thing you know, you're suffering from withdrawals just from not having your phone. So we've kind of talked about the psychological dependency that cell phones have, right? So, or that we come to have on cell phones and technology in general. I say cell phones because that's the most common piece of technology that everybody uses on a daily basis. But this also refers to tablets, computers, the broad spectrum. So let's talk about another aspect. Let's talk about social media. So technology is a convenient way to keep in touch with friends and family, share pictures, share stories, that sort of thing. But how does that affect our face-to-face communication skills? Face-to-face communication helps us to be able to read other people, build relationships, understand how people are reacting to the things we're saying, the way that we're acting. All of that can be achieved through face-to-face communication. But when we come to rely on technology for our communication, we lose the skills to be able to figure people out like that, to be able to build those strong relationships. WebMD actually has an article that's titled When Technology Addiction Takes Over Your Life. And it talks about how when we feel the need to stay connected all the time, to constantly check our text messages and our emails and our Facebook and our Twitter because we're afraid we're going to miss one little thing, our brain goes into overdrive. our brain starts to overheat, so to speak, like a car engine. And then the next thing you know, your brain becomes exhausted even when you don't realize it. This affects your work. It affects how you interact with people. It affects your relationships. In the long run, it can wind up causing relationships and friendships. It can wind up causing you your jobs. All just because you can't put your devices down long enough to not be in constant contact. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's true. And if you think about it, we're all guilty of it at some point or another. So, on the subject of friends, losing friends, that sort of thing, another major downside or negative effect of technology and communication is cyberbullying. People being picked on over the internet, their devices, that sort of thing. People get behind a screen, they feel like they're invisible. It gives them the nerve to say things that they wouldn't normally say. It gives them the nerve to pick on people that they might not pick on in person, or that they may be afraid they're going to get caught doing it in person. So then, we wind up seeing the cyberbullying, the people that are the victims of the cyberbullying, they don't know how to respond to it. They want to think that the person may be joking with them. They eventually start feeling down about themselves, and the next thing you know, it's the same thing as face-to-face bullying. It's no different. It's more accessible, in fact. So, I read an article on psychologytoday.com about cyberbullying, and it talks about how the screen or the computer actually desensitizes teens to the effect that their interactions have with the other people, because they can't physically see the response of their victim. And through that desensitization is where they come to feel that it's okay to continue that behavior. So this is a major issue. And if you have kids, you can certainly understand how that can be a major issue. So we've talked about the psychological dependence that we come to have on technology. We've talked about the social aspect of technology in our lives. Now let's talk about, I told you in the beginning we were going to compare psychology to drugs, right? Well, generally speaking, drugs are bad. But on the other hand, there are also certain drugs that people have to take that are necessary for life, that are necessary for the continuance of life, that they have to have for their health. So there are drugs that are good. That being said, there are aspects of technology that are good also. It's not all bad. Medical technology is a great example of this. Communication and medical technology has really come a long way. So NPR.org tells the story of a man named Carl Moore, who was diagnosed with ALS over 20 years ago. Normally, when people are diagnosed with ALS, they don't live more than a few years later. Well, if you're familiar with ALS completely shuts you down. You lose your ability to function, you lose your ability to speak, communicate, all of those sorts of things. Carl Moore knew, after his diagnosis, he knew what was to come. He first started seeing the signs of it affecting his fine motor skills, and the next thing he knew, he started seeing it was affecting his speech. He was slurring his speech, that sort of stuff. So what he did was he took his device and he started recording and uploading sayings in his voice to this device so that he would have them to use later when he was no longer able to communicate himself with the people he loved. And so now today, over 20 years later, he's able to communicate with his caretaker, who is also his wife, and able to say things to her via this technological device in his own voice, even though he's no longer able to speak. So, in my opinion, that's a pretty awesome example of what technology can do for us, too. Yeah, on a slightly smaller scale, another example where technology can be good for us is social media, as an example. Social media can help people connect who may feel socially awkward connecting to people face-to-face or in person. or people who are physically distant from other people, it may help them to connect that way too. So, like I said, technology, just like drugs, can have pros and cons. So let's wrap it up. The pros and cons are pros of technology being medical advancement, being the convenience, the access of information right at our fingertips. And then we have our cons, such as addiction, such as physical ailments, and those sorts of things. So for a lot of us, it may be too late to keep ourselves from becoming addicted to our technology. But when you leave today, just think about the aspects that we discussed today, and think about how monitoring our children's use of technology can benefit them in the future. This is Carl Moore that we talked about, and this is nice. Thank you guys. Have a good day.
How many more of those you got to do?